morning. I've been looking forward to this in some ways. In other ways, I have felt trepidation taking a step into this whole morass that we are experiencing. But we have to look at Israel and try to understand what they're experiencing as well. But the one thing that we need to understand at the beginning is that this is a sign of what's been happening for almost 1,400 years. The movement of Islam, the spread of Islam. And when it boils down, we need to realize that Islam and Judaism will never mix, and especially Islam and Christianity will never mix. There will never be peace between the two. Christianity and Islam at the root are diametrically opposed to one another. God is different. One is true, one is false. They don't accept Jesus as the Son of God. They don't accept the Trinity. And they never will. They started off that way, and they hold to it. So what we're seeing in this whole escapade of this recent escapade with Israel, and then now spreading across the world through these protests, is something that has had its root very long ago. So keep that in mind as we go through this. But I'm going to try to answer this question, whose land is it? I do have an answer at the very end, but I will let you get there with me. So we will begin. There are some books that have attempted to deal with this question. And the one on the right, I have a newer copy of it here, Whose Promised Land by Colin Chapman. He teaches on Islam in England. He's respected. I've not met him, but my colleague Jay Smith is a good friend of his and has been in debates with him because they are kind of at opposite ends at times. But they're good books to read and try to understand this very difficult dilemma. It's not an easy situation at all. And we're going to see that as we go through. And the question is this: does the land of Israel belong to the Jews? Well, you look back, Abraham and his descendants lived in it for many centuries before Christ. They believe God has promised it to them forever, the Jews do. And the United Nations gave it to them in 1947, officially. So where do we go from there? Still the question, whose land, because there were other people on it when they started resettling it. And of course, they were kicked out early on at different times, but came back. God gave this land to Abraham's descendants through Isaac and Jacob as a theological initiative to reveal himself to the nations. This was part of God's plan. We have to remember that. God located this people strategically to be a light to the Gentiles. Isaiah 49:6. For 4,000 years, the issue of who possesses the land and who lives on it has been primarily theological, not political. So we have to realize that today we're dealing also with political Israel, as well as theological Israel. And that gets in the way at times. So we have to be realistic about that. Basic to God's covenant with Abraham was a spiritual purpose. Genesis 12:3. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, we as Christians realize that blessing really developed through Christ. He was the answer. He was the person that the Old Testament was leading to through all those chapters and prophecies. He's fulfilled already over 200. But the second coming will fulfill the rest. So really, don't think of it as an Old Testament and a New Testament. Think of it as a continuum of God's work through his people. Who are the Palestinians? This is the big question that's going around today. Well, angered by the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135, the Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed the land Palestinia, land of the Philistines. The Philistines had been around for a long time. They were the ones who lived in what is now Gaza. The Phoenicians lived up in Lebanon, in that area. And they were seafaring people. But the Philistines were as well to an extent, but they also were the rivals against the early Jews as they came into the land after Moses and Joshua and in the time of David. The Philistines, an old term. And so it was called Palestina. But it was an area, not a people. Before 1948, Palestine had a regional connotation like Sahara or Sinai with no national denotation. So we don't call the people who live in Sinai Sinese. We call them Arabs. All people living in the region were Palestinians. So whether they were Jews or Arabs or Lebanese or whatever, they lived in Palestine. So they could be called Palestinians, but that was not a race. It was just the place name of the area. After 1948, Jews in the land took the name Israelis, and the Arabs assumed the right to Palestinians. So that's the demarcation point for the time that the Israelis held on to that name, and that's what they want to be called today, Israelis, even though they are Jews. But you also have Arab Israelis who are non-Jews. So you have to take that into consideration. A Palestinian state has never existed, nor has there ever been a distinct Palestinian language or culture. So when they say that something about the Palestinian people, they're talking about Arabs for the most part. But the Palestinian state has never existed. It's just an area that demarks that particular region. During the pre-1948 period, when the Jordanians controlled the West Bank, there was no initiative to establish a Palestinian state. And we'll see that as I go through a series of maps. So I'm going to show a lot of visuals, and sometimes I will have a lot of information on that page, and I'll just look at highlights. You're going to get this PowerPoint. You're going to get all this information, so you'll have that to work through. The ethnic origins of Palestinians, well, go back to Ishmael. Abraham's plea to God to recognize Ishmael as his heir was denied. Although redemptive history does not proceed through Ishmael, he is still greatly blessed, according to C.K. Barrett and Genesis. Esau went to another land away from his brother Jacob, the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom, the Edomites, and the Midianites and other descendants of Abraham. These are all people, groups that were involved in what we know as Israel today. What about the Canaanites? Well, Palestinians are not related to the Canaanites who occupied the land in ancient days. These people do not exist today. And you'll hear Palestinians today say, this is our land because we descended from the Canaanites. No. If they want to be called Arabs, then they've got to go back to Ishmael, Esau, Midianites, related to Abraham in some way. And then we know that there are groups of Arabs who were not related to Abraham or Ishmael. They were wanderers. They were nomads. They were from other groups. Now, in Israel now, you have Arab groups. You have the Israeli Arabs, and they comprise 20% of the population of the state of Israel. They are full citizens with the rights of citizenship. They're not necessarily of the Jewish religion. There are a number of Christians who are Arabs in Israel, Israeli Arabs. Palestinians. living in the territories, the West Bank and Gaza, their territories. Most live in their own villages, others in refugee camps set up in 1948 by the UN and by the Jordanians, who, when they left, anticipated an era of victory and a soon return. One thing you need to realize is that there are all these refugee camps. And those in the refugee camps are often called Palestinian Arabs. And they live in these camps in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, and other countries. Why do they stay in the refugee camps and not move out and mix with the rest of the country? Because they feel that they have a right to go back to Palestine. It is their land, and they need to get back there, and that's what they are waiting for. And those refugee camps are often very poor. Question, will those countries allow them to leave the refugee camps and assimilate? Not likely. They don't want them. But something happened on October 7th, 2023, that woke everybody up. And here's a map that shows the red dots are the people where the Israelis were murdered, and there are black dots there as well showing where they were kidnapped. I know it's a small map, but you can find that online. It's very illustrative because all along the border you see that they went out, the Hamas went out and killed. Oh, they planned for a long time, and it is thought that the direct plan came from Iran. It was planned by the strategists there. Then you have this term, from the river to the sea, the waking up of Islam. Hamas sees the struggle as, and this is from Mark Dury. I've sent you that article that he wrote, the 8 sections. So this is, next couple of slides are from Mark Dury. Hamas sees this struggle as one that is incumbent on all Muslims everywhere. It aims to awaken 2 billion Muslims to join in the struggle. By its example, Hamas wants to stir up Muslims everywhere to take up arms against Jews. They believe the October 7th massacre will inspire Muslims to achieve even greater things. They want to light a fuse that will lead to a victorious explosion of violence. For this reason, simultaneous with the recent massacre, Hamas issued calls to the Muslims of the world to rise up. The many demonstrations all over the world in support of the Hamas resistance were a direct response to this call for global action. And that's what you see. With the protests, many of the protests here at the universities, you had them led by first the Islamic groups, but then they were joined by outsiders, infiltrators, paid agitators. Many of them were part of the BLM movement too. So what is Hamas? This is again Mark Dury. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, founded in 1988. This is Hamas. Hamas's name, Brotherhood, was found before that by Hassan al-Banna. Hamas's name is an acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement. Right there in the name, you know what it's all about. And that's in Arabic. The word Hamas also means zeal, enthusiasm, or fanaticism in Arabic. In Hebrew, Hamas means wickedness, violence, or destruction. It fits, it seems. Hamas is one of 2 parties in power among the Palestinians. The other is Fatah, whose name is also an acronym with the meaning conquest. So you see where the Arabs, the Muslims, are going with this. There are 2 Palestinian territories. Hamas rules in Gaza, while Fatah rules in the West Bank. Hamas took power in Gaza in 2006 from Fatah after winning a democratic election. How democratic it was, that's very well known what happened. At the time, a conflict between the 2 parties broke out in which hundreds were killed. Fatah and the Hamas do not like each other. Both Fatah and Hamas are radical Islamist movements. At times in the past, they have fought each other, but they have also made attempts at rapprochement. Fatah has praised Hamas for the October 7th attacks, of course, and has called upon all Palestinians to rise up in solidarity. In fact, throughout the Muslim world, whether they have ever considered doing anything with the Palestinians, they're now in favor of their cause because it is something that will put Islam forward in the world. And what is the goal of Hamas? The goals of Hamas are laid out in a document known as the Hamas Charter, which was adopted in August 1988. There is no evidence that Hamas has renounced or retreated from even a single line of their covenant. A little bit later, I'm going to read you a couple lines from that covenant. Hamas's most fundamental goal is to implement Islam fully and strictly. The charter states about Hamas that Allah is its target, the Prophet is its example, and the Quran is its constitution. Jihad is its path, and death for the sake of Allah is the loftiest of its wishes. So that's why they say, you Christians don't want to die, but we live to die, because then we'll go right to paradise. The charter also makes clear that a core goal of Hamas is the destruction of Israel. It cites the words of the founder of the Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna: Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it. And that's what they want to do now. So you see these signs from the river to the sea: Palestine will be free. Do they even know what they're talking about holding up those signs? Mark Dury goes on, for reasons given above, Hamas is completely opposed to a two-state solution. Take that in. Completely opposed to a two-state solution. They've turned it down time after time after time. They don't want the Israelis there. Every attack on Israel is designed to prevent this happening. The Hamas covenant states that, quote, so-called peaceful solutions in international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. There is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. For Hamas, it is military victory or nothing. That's in their covenant, and they've held to it. According to Carl Trueman, teaches at Grove City, these campus protests are motivated by hatred of Jews. That's what he condenses it down to. The thing that unites these groups is neither concern for Arab lives nor respect for Islamic culture. They are united only in wanting to tear down. It's part of the whole movement across the world, the Great Reset, the Marxist movement. This is where you start seeing what we've been talking about with this whole cultural revolution. It's happening in another way through this Jewish Muslim controversy. In short, these protests are a manifestation of the Mephistophelian spirit of negation, or in religious terms, the spirit of desecration. To borrow from Marx, all that is holy must be profaned. It's a Marxist outcome. That's why they label it so much oppressed and oppressor. And Israel is the oppressor in this whole extravaganza, and the Muslims are the oppressed. The Palestinians are the oppressed. But I've got a whole series on this. I'm just putting these particular dates. 2000, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his family were there. It was given to them, promised to them by God. Then you have the Exodus and the conquest of the land under Joshua. They conquered everybody. Isn't it the case that when groups come in and conquer and they want to stay there, that it's their land for that time? That's been the way the Middle East has run for thousands of years. Now the Muslims have all the land in the Middle East. And why? Because they conquered it. Nobody says they should get out. Nobody calls them colonialists. And then you have the the kingdom under David and Solomon and Israel and Judah for hundreds of years. And then they were exiled in the Babylonian exile. They came back and so on. I just jump from 661 to 1918, actually 1917 probably. They were under Muslim rule from the Umayyad to the Ottoman Empire. And then 1948, they were given the right to be their own country by the UN. And so you see the map on the left from 200 BC, 350. It was mixed with the Roman Empire, but they had a time when they had their own statehood. And the one on the right with all that pink. You see also on the very left, Philistia, which was the basis for the name Palestine, and the Phoenicians up there near Tyre. Okay, so there's a lot of battle that went on all through those times. And this is an interesting little map showing that through the Muslim caliphates, it exchanged hands as the different Muslim groups changed hands. Most of them were not Arab groups. They were Persian. They were Turkish. Started off with the Arabs, but the Abbasid, they were mostly Persians. And then you had other Turkish groups, the Seljuk Turks. So the Ottoman Empire was mostly a Turkish empire. So to claim it for the Arabs is a misnomer. And then after World War I, there was his mandate for Palestine. This was the original land that Britain inherited from that treaty, from the winning the war. And they were going to splice it up. That's only part of it, but this was the mandate for this group, this land, including what is now Jordan. This was to be given to Israel. And then they chopped it up over time. We'll see that. It's interesting, though. Israel now is 1/800th the size of the Arab world. Not the Muslim world, but just the Arab world. So the question is, why can there be 49 Muslim majority states but not even one Jewish one? It's the size of New Jersey. And you have all these other large territories that are in Muslim control, and the Arabs, the Muslims, don't want them to have that. It's interesting, too, that you see back in 1550, it was, the land was mostly under Muslim control. Christians had left or converted. A lot of Christians left. And so for hundreds of years, very few Christians and Jews. And then the immigration started, from Russia in the 1800s and so on. And then very much in after Israel was formed in 1948. So the Jews continued to grow, and the Christians kind of up and down. This gives you all the way back to the time of Jesus, where the blue would be the Jews in that area. 70% were Jews, and then a lot of conversions. So after the 300s, when Christianity really maintained its influence, Israel, or the land there, was mostly Christian, and then they were driven out when the Muslims came in and took over. That's the green line. And now, but look, the Muslims have gone down in comparison, and there are more Jews in Israel now, down about over 50%. Muslims over 40%, and then you have a number of other Christians and other groups. But it's interesting demographics. As far as GDP, Israel is the second highest in the whole area under Saudi Arabia. And of course, Saudi Arabia has that oil money. And then the West Bank and Gaza is all the way at the bottom. GDP less than 5,000 a year. They're holding themselves back in many ways. They were under the Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years. 1516 to 1917, Islamic Ottoman Empire, ruled by Turkish rule, really. And Then you had the realignment of these areas in 1920. So they were all given statehood. It was split up. The Ottoman Empire was reimagined. So here you would have the present divisions, and that's what we look at now. But all of that was just one empire, the Ottoman Empire, for hundreds of years under Muslim rule. There are historical factors leading to the birth of the state. The end of the Ottoman Empire made possible British control of Palestine under the Mandate. The Balfour Declaration expressed the concept of establishing Palestine as a homeland for Jews. The Russian Revolution in 1917 and the availability of land in Palestine encouraged immigration. A lot of them came from Russia. The departure of the Turks from Palestine created a vacuum that drew Arabs and Jews into the land. There weren't that many Arabs, as many as as there are now. Then governed by Britain under the League of Nations mandate. So 1922 to 1948, Britain held control. It wasn't Palestinian. It wasn't Muslim. It was a mandate under British control. This is just a part of the declaration. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. They wanted the Jews to have a country. Okay, and that's even before the Holocaust. And so this was the first 50 years of the Jewish development. After the birth of the state, they had a lot of battles. Sinai Campaign, Six-Day War, Yom Kippur, First and Second Intifada, a rebellion. So let me go through a series now of these maps to show you how it developed from this Balfour Treaty and the breakup of the land. So here you have the original idea of Palestine. Larger holding of land that was supposed to be for the Jews. And so Palestine was the area allotted by the United Nations mandate in 1920 for a Jewish homeland. And it was surrounded by new Islamic nations created after World War I following the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So all Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, all recreated. But they were Muslim for the most part. And then you had the division of the Mandate area. Britain's dividing of the Mandate area decreased by 2/3 the land intended for a Jewish state as anticipated in the Balfour Declaration. They gave them to the Jordanians, to the rulers of that area as I don't know if it was for peace or what, but all that part that you see as Transjordan, that was allotted first for Israel, and they gave it up. Closed to Jewish settlement, so they were not allowed to go there. So their land was already whittled down to 1/3. And then part of it up there, the Golan Heights, ceded to Syria in 1923. And then the partition plan of 1947, this is how they're going to try to give it a two-state feel. The gray would have been for the Muslims, and the light-colored would be for Israel. But number 3, 5 days after the 33-13 vote to approve the plan, the Arabs began a war to prevent its implementation. No, we don't want that. And that was the war that you had all these different groups coming in. It was declared on May 14th, 1948, and then 5 nations on that day attacked the new state of Israel May 14th to 15th, 1948. So Egypt and Jordan and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Syria and Lebanon. And this is kind of a map to show you the intensity of all these groups coming in. You think, how can poor Israel withstand that? And yet, from 15th of May to 10th of June, they fought, and they won over all these countries. They defeated them. And you would think, okay, if they defeated them, why can't they claim the land then for themselves? The armistice lines then, created in 1949, the independent state, the Arabs continued, but remember, they were expecting a quick victory. But number 4, losing to the Israelis, these nations insisted on the previous partition lines as borders. Please give us back our land. Result, no Palestinian state. They didn't want to take it. They just became territories again. And then Jordan annexed Samaria and Judea. You see the lighter, the mid-brown, West Bank. That was Jordan. That belonged to Jordan. Gaza belonged to Egypt. So under Jordanian rule and Gaza under Egyptian rule. Not under, and then you had Israel. So Israel has been more than generous with its land. Okay, Syria frequently attacked towns in kibbutzim in northern Galilee from the Golan Heights. I don't know if you remember that. 49 to 67. Constantly. It's what Gaza has been doing. Well, that first came to Syria, and then, the Israelis put up a lot of defense and took a lot of the land. Kingdom of Jordan controlled Samaria and Judea, including Jerusalem. The Jordanians destroyed the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem and prohibited Jewish access to the western wall of the Temple Mount. Jews couldn't go there. That was their sacred place because their temple had been destroyed and they weren't allowed to rebuild it. And they conquered all these countries. But the UN and others were not allowing them to take control. Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. Israel's vulnerability. After 3 weeks of hostile actions by Egypt and intensified attacks by Syria, Israel launched preemptive strikes on June 5th. Rejecting an Israeli appeal to stay out of the conflict, Jordan attacked Israel and lost the West Bank and the eastern sector of Jerusalem. Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria. The war ended June 10th. 6-day war. They tried again, and they lost. So, this is what Israel looked like after that. By claiming the land. They won it. Syria lost the Golan Heights. Jordan lost the West Bank. Egypt lost the Sinai. But outside influence and Muslim constant pressure. There is a failure to resolve territorial disputes arising from the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. So number 2, the assurance Israel's general staff felt that Israel was safe from Arab attack for the indefinite future. They had that, they hoped. Therefore, Israel felt no reason to trade territory for peace. So there was the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And that was another set of attacks that were thwarted by the Israelis. So you see the change from the top left, that was the mandate, kept changing, and little by little, you see at the bottom left, the 1979 Camp David peace plan, taking a big part of Sinai, giving it back to Egypt. 1982, the Camp David peace plan, final withdrawal from Sinai, so they gave it all back to Egypt. Trying to give land for peace. 2000 Oslo Accords, withdrawal from the West Bank, giving it back to Jordan. And then 2005 unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, giving it back to now Hamas. So they've been giving back land. So the boundaries today, you see the West Bank. Jerusalem is the divided city. Gaza is under Hamas control. West Bank under Fatah control. Now this is a really interesting little series. I'm coming to the end. But this is what you hear from the Muslims, Hamas. They say, well, Israel's taking all the land. Israel would be demarked by the white, and Palestine mostly for the Muslims would be green. So back in 1946, before it was Israel was given the land, The little white spots were where the Israelis were settling. 1947, the white was considered occupied by Israel. Still have the West Bank and the Gaza and up near Lebanon, that northern region, Palestine. But after the war, 1948-67, then you have less land for Palestine. And then they show 2012, and they say, well, look, Israel's taking all the land. The green that's left is for the Palestinians. You see that series on the web a lot, but really it's telling the inaccuracy. On the left, the truth. In 1946, the land was not Palestinian, it was British, part of the British mandate still. The second one, the truth. The Palestinians rejected this partition plan in favor of war. The Israelis agreed to give West Bank and Gaza and this northern region to a second state. But the Palestinians rejected it. Third panel, the truth. The green areas were occupied by Jordan and Egypt, not Palestine. Remember that in the war, after the war. And then the fourth panel, the truth. The green areas are the first ever Palestinian rule created by Israel. They allowed them to take over. And they're constantly having to fight. And this is an interesting further panel, because you see in 1888 it was part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1918 to 1946 it was under British mandatory rule. It was a mandate. And then you had the UN plan in 1947 that finally decided to give this land to Israel. Now, the second panel doesn't show all of Transjordan, but remember they had all that other territory that was, 2/3 was taken away before they became the state. And the green, the fourth panel, you see the green, that's what Jordan had. And then in the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, Israel controlled all of that, even the West Bank, even the Sinai Peninsula. But then they gave it over through accords, land for peace, back to Egypt, back to Jordan. And that's what you have now on the very right. And Gaza was controlled by Hamas, is. So let me finish up. Palestinian National Covenant. This is what the Palestinians wrote. This is what they said. Just some excerpts. The liberation of Palestine, from an Arab viewpoint, is a national duty, and it attempts to repel the Zionist and imperialistic aggression against the Arab homeland, and aims at the elimination of Zionism in Palestine. The partition of Palestine in 1947 and the establishment of the State of Israel are entirely illegal, regardless of the passage of time, because they were contrary to the will of the Palestinian people and their natural right in their homeland. So they were claiming that it's their homeland when there never was a Palestinian homeland. The Balfour Declaration, they said, the mandate for Palestine and everything that has been based upon them are deemed null and void. Claims of historical or religious ties of the Jews with Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history. Well, I just showed you. Well, I'm going to show you another little comparison of history. And they said Zionism is racist and fanatic in its nature, aggressive, expansionist, and colonialist in its aims, and fascist in its methods. How can it be a colonial country when it has no main country to now be a colony? They didn't have a land. I mean, you talk about Britain having colonies like India and other places. Well, that's because Britain was the main country and they were colonies. But Israel is not a colony. It doesn't have a homeland other than Israel. It is the homeland. The Arab-Palestinian agenda, number one, it is not possession of the land. What is it? It is elimination of the state of Israel and all Jews. Now I'll let you go through those points. This is a very interesting chart. Palestinian perspective versus the historical. Remember the covenant. Palestinian perspective. Jerusalem is an Arab city because its first builders were the Canaanite Jebusites, whose descendants are the Palestinians. Historically inaccurate. As descendants of Ishmael and Esau, Palestinian Arabs have no ethnic linkage with the extinct Canaanites. Palestinian view. It was not the Israelites, but the Canaanites who developed the civilization in the city. Well, Jerusalem has been the national capital and spiritual center of Jews since David captured Jebus in 1000 BC. Nothing to do with the Canaanites. They were vanquished and now extinct. Ever since the destruction of the temple, the Palestinians say, the link between Jews and Christians in Jerusalem has been severed. Well, although temporarily expelled in AD 135, the Kokhba Revolution, Jews have lived in Jerusalem continuously for 3,000 years, even in small amounts. But now they have the majority population. So the history gives a very different story. We get such unfactual news every day, and so you need to be aware of that. There is a tremendous bias that comes from the liberal side and from the Muslim side. So, whose land is it? My conclusion? Belongs to God. We need to let Him deal with it, and He will.